A young foal breaks through the trees at dawn, wild-eyed and desperate, pulling at a cowboy's sleeve until he follows. Deep in the Montana wilderness, the seasoned rancher discovers the foal's mother trapped in a nightmare no man should witness. What started as a simple rescue becomes something far darker when he realizes this wasn't an accident. Someone has been using these woods for purposes that turn his blood cold. The land he's known his whole life suddenly feels foreign and dangerous. As he fights to free the mare, he uncovers evidence of an operation that's been hiding in plain sight for years. What terrible secret has been buried in these mountains? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Mercer stood on his porch as the first light broke over the Bitterroot Range, coffee steaming in his weathered hands. At 58, he knew every ridge and valley that stretched before him, could read the weather in the way clouds gathered over Sentinel Peak, could tell the season by which flowers bloomed along the creek. This land had been his life for 40 years, since he'd returned from his stint in the Army Corps of Engineers and started building something permanent. The ranch spread across 300 acres of Ironwood Valley, nestled between the mountains and the Madison River. His great-grandfather had homesteaded here in 1889, and every generation since had worked this soil, raised cattle and horses, lived and died under these big Montana skies. The main house was timber frame, built by his grandfather's hands, with additions Jack had made over the years. A barn, 2 outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where his small herd grazed in contentment. He took a long sip of coffee and watched the horses emerge from the morning mist. 12 of them, ranging from the old gelding Sawyer, who'd been with him 20 years, to the yearlings just learning their place in the herd. Jack knew each one by temperament and history, could spot a limp or behavioral change from 100 yards. His late wife Elena used to say he spoke horse better than he spoke human, and she hadn't been entirely wrong. Elena, 3 years gone this October, taken by cancer that moved too fast for medicine to catch. The house still echoed with her absence. Her reading chair by the fireplace, her gardening boots by the back door, her handwriting on the calendar marking seasons and tasks. Jack had left it all exactly as it was. Some men might call that living in the past, but he called it honoring memory. The screen door creaked behind him. Carlos Mendoza, his foreman for the past 15 years, stepped out with his own mug of coffee. Carlos was 10 years younger than Jack, compact and strong, with a face that crinkled easily into smiles but could turn granite hard when the situation demanded it. "Morning, boss," Carlos said, settling against the porch rail. "Fence in the north pasture needs attention. Found 2 posts loose yesterday. That's the 3rd time this month," Jack said slowly. "Different sections each time." Carlos nodded. "Been thinking the same thing. Could be weather, but it feels wrong." Jack finished the thought. They'd worked together long enough to share instincts. Tools going missing too. That drill bit last week, the bolt cutters before that. Could be the Hartley boys. They've been in trouble before. Jack shook his head slightly. The Hartley boys are loud and obvious. This feels different, more deliberate. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. The day's work lay ahead. Fence repairs, feeding, checking water levels in the stock tanks, a dozen other tasks that kept a ranch running. Jack had 2 other hands who came in part-time, but the core work fell to him and Carlos. "Sarah called last night," Jack said. "She's doing well in Denver. Made junior partner at her firm." "That's good. She coming home for Thanksgiving? Says she'll try. You know how it is with those big city law offices." Pride mixed with longing in Jack's voice. His daughter was all he had left of Elena, and seeing her once or twice a year felt like too little, even though he understood her life had taken her elsewhere. They finished their coffee and descended to the day's labor. Jack checked on each horse, running experienced hands over legs and withers, examining hooves, looking for anything amiss. The horses knew him and stood calm under his inspection. Old Sawyer nuzzled his pocket looking for treats, and Jack obliged with a sugar cube. By mid-morning, they were working on the fence line when Jack noticed something else. ATV tracks cutting through the grass just beyond his property line. Fresh tracks, probably from the previous night. They led toward the mountains, toward the dense forest that covered the slopes above the valley. "You see these?" Jack crouched beside the tracks. Carlos examined them. 2 machines, maybe 3, coming from Tom Whitfield's place, heading into the national forest. Tom Whitfield owned the adjacent ranch to the east. He and Jack had been neighbors for 30 years, their relationship cordial but never particularly warm. Tom had always struck Jack as a man more interested in making money than in the land itself. Over the past year, Tom had mentioned financial troubles several times, hinted at needing to sell or bring in partners. "Tom's been talking about new business opportunities," Carlos said carefully. "Some kind of consulting work with a company out of Denver." Jack straightened, his knees protesting the movement. "What kind of consulting?" "Didn't say. But there've been strangers around his place. Fancy trucks, equipment I don't recognize." The unease Jack had been feeling crystallized into something sharper. Strangers asking questions in town. Tools disappearing. Fences being tampered with. ATV tracks in the night. Individually, these things meant little. Together, they formed a pattern that Jack's instincts told him to pay attention to. That evening, after Carlos had left for his small house on the south end of the property, Jack sat in Elena's chair with her nature journal in his lap. She'd kept detailed records of the valley's ecology, bird migrations, wildflower blooms, wildlife sightings, weather patterns. Her handwriting flowed across the pages, observations mixed with sketches and pressed flowers. He turned to the entries from 3 years ago, reading her notes about the horses, about the foals born that spring. One entry caught his attention. "Saw a young mare today in the high meadow, beautiful chestnut with a white blaze. She's wild, probably descended from the Mustang herds that used to roam these mountains. Jack says there aren't many left. We should protect what wildness remains." Protect what wildness remains. Elena had understood that this land was more than property, more than an economic asset. It was a living thing, a place where wild and domestic existed in careful balance, where the past reached into the present with gnarled roots. Jack closed the journal and looked out the window at the darkening mountains. Somewhere up there, in the forest Elena had loved, something was happening, something that made his instincts scream warning even though he couldn't yet name the threat. He thought about the wild mare Elena had written about, wondered if she still ran free in those high meadows, wondered what secrets the mountains were holding. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start paying closer attention. Tomorrow, he would begin asking questions. A man didn't spend 40 years on land without learning to read its moods, and right now, the land was telling him something was deeply wrong. He just didn't know yet how right he was, or how much danger was already moving through the darkness, toward everything he held dear. The trails into the high country had been Jack's domain since childhood. His father had taught him every path, every shortcut, every place where springs emerged from the rock to form clear pools. Later, Jack had explored further, mapping the terrain in his mind with the precision his army training had reinforced. When he'd brought Elena here as a young bride, she'd fallen in love with the wilderness as deeply as he had. He remembered one particular afternoon, maybe 20 years back, when they'd ridden up to Eagle's Rest, a promontory that overlooked the entire valley. Elena had brought her journal and spent an hour sketching the view while Jack dozed against a sun-warmed boulder. On the ride back down, they detoured through a hidden canyon where wildflowers grew so thick the air smelled like perfume. "This is what we're protecting," Elena had said, gesturing at the riot of color. "Not just our ranch, but this. All of this." Jack kept an old surveyor's map in his study, dated 1947, showing trails and clearings that most people had forgotten. Some of those old paths still existed, overgrown but navigable if you knew where to look. He'd added his own notations over the years, marking good camping spots, seasonal water sources, places where elk gathered in winter. That morning, he drove his truck into Cedar Ridge, the town that served as the valley's commercial heart. Population 847, according to the sign, though Jack suspected that number hadn't been updated in a decade. Main Street ran 3 blocks, lined with buildings that dated back to when this was mining country. The general store, the hardware store, Maggie's Diner, the post office, and the sheriff's office occupied prime spots. A few other businesses filled in the gaps, a real estate office that stayed perpetually hopeful, a bar called the Cottonwood that had survived numerous attempts at gentrification, and Doc Harrison's veterinary clinic. Jack parked in front of the general store, where Mary Patterson had been running the register for 35 years. Mary knew everyone's business, not because she was nosy, but because people talked and she listened. She'd know if anything unusual was happening in the valley. The bell above the door chimed as Jack entered. Mary looked up from restocking shelves and smiled, her weathered face creasing into familiar lines. "Morning, Jack? You need the usual?" "Morning, Mary. Yes, and maybe some information if you've got it." She raised an eyebrow and moved behind the counter while Jack gathered supplies. When he brought his items up, she rang them up slowly, giving them time to talk. "What kind of information? Strangers in town? People asking questions, taking photographs, that sort of thing?" Mary's hands paused over the register. "Funny you should ask. Had 3 different groups through here in the past month. City types, expensive clothes, asking about property values and mineral rights. One fellow wanted to know about water sources in the high country." "What'd you tell him?" "Told him to talk to the county recorder's office." Mary's eyes sharpened. "Why are you asking?" Jack paid for his supplies and leaned against the counter. "Just a feeling. Things don't add up lately. You heard anything about Tom Whitfield's new business partners? Only that they've got money and they're not from around here. Some kind of development company out of Denver, or maybe it's Salt Lake. Tom's been spending it freely, bought a new truck, took a trip to Hawaii. But he's also been real secretive about what exactly they're doing." The bell chimed again as Sheriff Rita Gonzalez entered. Rita had been sheriff for 8 years, brought in from Missoula after the previous sheriff retired. She was sharp, fair, and had earned the respect of most Valley residents. She nodded at Jack and Mary. "Talking about Tom Whitfield?" Rita asked, picking up enough of the conversation to guess the topic. "Seems like a popular subject," Jack said. Rita grabbed a coffee from the pot Mary kept going and joined them at the counter. "I've had my eye on the situation. Nothing illegal as far as I can tell, but something feels off. There's been increased activity on Forest Service roads, equipment moving at night, that sort of thing." "You investigate?" called the Forest Service. "They said they'd authorized some survey work, geological assessments for potential mineral deposits. All legal, all permitted." Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Mineral deposits. That's what they said. Apparently there's been new research suggesting rare earth elements in these mountains. Tech companies need them for computers and phones, and China controls most of the world's supply. So American companies are looking for domestic sources, and they think they found some here. Rita shrugged. Maybe it's just prospecting that won't amount to anything. But I don't like the secrecy, and I don't like strangers operating in the dark." Mary refilled their coffees without being asked. "This valley's changing," she said quietly. "Used to be everyone knew everyone. Now we've got people buying up land, making plans we're not part of. Tom Whitfield's not the only one who's been approached. The Hendersons sold their place last year to an LLC nobody can identify. The old Rawlings homestead went the same way." Jack thought about his own property, the letters he'd received offering to buy him out. Generous offers, really. More than the land was worth by traditional measures. He'd thrown every letter away unopened after the first one. "They've approached you?" Rita asked. 3 times in the past 6 months. I stopped reading the letters." "Smart," Mary said. "Once you start listening to their numbers, it gets tempting." They talked a while longer, sharing pieces of a puzzle none of them could quite see the shape of yet. When Jack left, he drove past Tom Whitfield's ranch. New fencing, new gates, security cameras he didn't remember seeing before. A sign warned against trespassing in language that felt more corporate than neighborly. That afternoon, Jack called Sarah in Denver. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying the controlled stress of someone juggling multiple cases. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" "Everything's fine, honey. Just wanted to hear your voice." They talked about her work, about Denver's early snow, about the mayor's recovery. Then Jack asked, "You ever hear of rare earth mineral mining in your environmental cases?" There was a pause. "Why do you ask?" He explained what he'd learned. Sarah listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Dad, I've worked on 3 cases involving mineral extraction in the past 2 years. Each time there were companies operating in gray areas, skirting regulations, doing exploratory work without proper environmental reviews. In one case, they contaminated an entire watershed before anyone caught them. These were legitimate companies? On paper, yes. Shell corporations backed by larger entities, lawyers who knew how to exploit loopholes. By the time we built a case, the damage was done and the responsible parties had dissolved into other corporate structures. Jack looked out his window at the mountains rising in the distance. If someone was planning something like that here, what would be the signs? Survey work, equipment staging, property acquisition, corruption of local officials or at least their cooperation, and probably intimidation of anyone who asks too many questions. That's what I was afraid you'd say. Dad, if something's happening up there, you need to be careful. These operations involve serious money, and serious money attracts serious people. Don't go playing detective. I'm just keeping my eyes open. Promise me you'll call if anything feels dangerous. I promise, honey. After they hung up, Jack sat at Elena's desk and pulled out the old surveyor's map. He traced the property lines, the trails, the areas where strangers had been seen. A pattern was emerging, like a constellation slowly becoming visible as your eyes adjusted to the dark. Whatever was happening, it centered on the high country, on the land Elena had loved and wanted protected. Jack felt the weight of that memory, of promises made and kept. He'd built a life on being steady, on honoring commitments, on protecting what mattered. Now something threatened the land itself, and he couldn't just look away. The foal appeared at dawn on a Tuesday, 3 days after Jack's conversation with Sarah. He was feeding the horses when movement at the tree line caught his eye. A young horse, maybe 6 months old, emerged from the forest at a full gallop. Its coat was dark with sweat, its eyes showing white all around. Jack set down the feed bucket and approached slowly, hands visible, voice low and calm. Easy now, easy. The foal stopped 20 feet away, sides heaving. It was a filly, chestnut with a white blaze, just like the wild mare Elena had written about in her journal. The resemblance was so strong that Jack felt his breath catch. This could be that mare's offspring, born in the wild high country. "Where's your mama, little one?" The foal nickered urgently and trotted toward him, then away, then back again. The behavior was unmistakable. Something was wrong, and this young animal had somehow understood that humans could help. Jack had seen it before with domestic horses, but never with a wild one. "Carlos," Jack called toward the barn, "bring the medical kit and tell Maria we might need Doc Harrison." Carlos appeared, took one look at the situation, and nodded. The foal was already moving back toward the trees, pausing every few steps to make sure Jack was following. Jack grabbed a rope and followed. The foal led him past the pasture fence, through the strip of grassland that bordered his property, and into the forest. The terrain grew rougher immediately, rising toward the mountains. Jack knew these trails, but the foal wasn't following any established path. It picked its way through underbrush, crossed a small creek, and climbed a ridge that Jack rarely visited. They traveled for 40 minutes, the foal maintaining a steady pace that forced Jack to work to keep up. His knees protested the climb, but he pushed through. Carlos followed at a distance, carrying the medical kit and a rifle in case they encountered a predator. The foal led them to a clearing Jack had never seen before, hidden in a fold of the mountain. Ancient pines surrounded it, their branches creating deep shadows even in morning light. And in the center of that clearing, a chestnut mare lay on her side, one rear leg caught in a massive steel trap. Jack's stomach turned. The trap was no ordinary wildlife snare. It was industrial grade, the kind used for large predators, and completely illegal on national forest land. The jaws had closed on the mare's leg just above the hock. She'd struggled, that was obvious from the torn earth around her. Now she lay still, exhausted, her breathing labored and shallow. The foal ran to her mother and nuzzled her neck. The mare lifted her head slightly and nickered softly to her baby. "Jesus," Carlos breathed, coming up beside Jack. "Who would set something like that out here? Someone who doesn't care about laws or animals." Jack approached slowly, letting the mare see him. She tried to struggle but lacked the strength. "Easy, girl, we're here to help." He examined the trap carefully. It was staked to the ground with cables strong enough to hold a grizzly. The mechanism was sophisticated, triggered by pressure plates. This wasn't just cruel. It was deliberate, professional-grade equipment deployed by people who knew what they were doing. "Call Doc Harrison," Jack said. "Tell him to bring heavy bolt cutters and sedatives. And call Rita. She needs to see this." While Carlos made the calls, Jack searched the clearing. He found tire tracks from ATVs, multiple cigarette butts that looked recent, and disturbed earth suggesting other traps might have been set and retrieved. Someone had been using this area regularly, and not for any legitimate purpose. The mare watched him with dark, pain-filled eyes. She was maybe 4 years old, in her prime. The foal was her first, Jack guessed, born wild and free in these mountains. Now mother and baby both faced a crisis that never should have happened. Jack returned to the mare and knelt beside her head, placing a hand on her neck. Her coat was damp with sweat and stress, her pulse rapid. The trap had done significant damage. Even if they freed her, infection was a serious risk. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he said quietly. "We're going to get you out." The foal pressed close to its mother, and Jack was struck by the trust the young animal had shown in seeking human help. Wild horses usually avoided people. This filly had overcome instinct because her mother's need was greater than fear. Doc Harrison arrived within an hour, his truck bouncing over rough terrain that wasn't quite a road. He was in his 60s, a compact man with steady hands and 3 decades of experience with large animals. He took one look at the trap and swore, "I haven't seen one of these since I worked in Alaska. They're designed for brown bears. Can you save her? Depends on the damage. Let me sedate her first so we can work." The sedative took effect quickly. The mare's breathing slowed, her body relaxed. Jack and Carlos worked the bolt cutters while Doc Harrison prepared to assess the injury. The trap's mechanism was complex, designed to hold against incredible force. It took 20 minutes to cut through the cables and release the jaws. The mare's leg was badly damaged. Lacerations exposed muscle and bone. The trap had been on her for at least 12 hours, maybe more, and infection had already begun. Doc Harrison cleaned the wound and administered antibiotics, his face grave. "She needs surgery, but I can't do it here. We need to transport her to my clinic. Will she survive the trip? Maybe. She's tough, and she's got a reason to live." Doc nodded at the foal, who hadn't left her mother's side. Sheriff Rita arrived as they were preparing a makeshift travois to move the mare. She examined the trap, photographed the clearing, collected cigarette butts in evidence bags. Her expression grew darker with each discovery. "This is federal land," she said. "These traps are illegal, and whoever set them committed multiple felonies." "Any idea who?" Jack asked. "I have suspicions, but proving it is another matter." Rita's eyes met his. "Jack, you need to be careful. People who do this kind of thing aren't going to appreciate you finding their operation." "Their operation? This wasn't random. Look at the pattern." Rita pointed to disturbances in the earth. "Multiple trap sites, regular visits, systematic coverage of the area. Someone's using this section of forest for something, and they don't want witnesses, 4-legged or 2-legged. They loaded the mare carefully onto the travois, cushioning her injured leg as best they could. The foal followed anxiously as they began the slow journey back down the mountain. It took 3 hours to reach Doc Harrison's clinic, every step a delicate balance between speed and care. At the clinic, Doc Harrison performed surgery while Jack, Carlos, and Rita waited. The foal stood in a nearby stall, calling occasionally to its mother. Jack brought it water and hay, but the young horse barely touched either. When Doc emerged, his scrubs were blood-stained, but his expression was cautiously optimistic. "She's stable. I had to place pins to stabilize the bone, and she'll need weeks of recovery, but she's got a fighting chance. Can she ever be released back to the wild? That depends on how she heals. The leg will always be weak. But she's alive, and that's more than I expected." Jack looked at the foal through the stall door. "What about her baby? The foal can stay with her mother during recovery. After that, we'll see. Wild horses are adaptable. She might be fine on her own, or she might need to join a domestic herd." Rita joined Jack by the stall. "I'm going to investigate this, but I need you to stay clear. Don't go back to that clearing. Don't ask questions that might alert whoever's responsible. You think they know we found the trap? If they're monitoring the area, they'll know it was triggered and then removed. That'll make them either more careful or more desperate. Neither option is good for you." Jack watched the foal settle nervously in the straw. He thought about Elena's journal entry, about protecting what wildness remained. This mare and her foal represented something precious and increasingly rare. Someone had tried to destroy that, and Jack felt anger burning in his chest like hot coals. I appreciate the warning, Rita. But I can't just pretend this didn't happen. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to be smart. Let me do my job. Jack nodded, but he could feel his resolve hardening. Someone had brought violence and cruelty to these mountains. Someone was operating in the shadows, setting traps that could catch anything from wild horses to hikers to children. The threat was real, immediate, and personal. He'd found the trap by accident, led by a desperate foal. But now that he knew what was happening, he couldn't turn away. Elena's memory, his own sense of justice, his responsibility to the land demanded action. The question wasn't whether he'd investigate further. The question was how much danger he was willing to face to uncover the truth. The mare survived the first critical night. Jack visited Doc Harrison's clinic every morning, bringing fresh hay and checking on both mother and foal. The young horse had calmed somewhat, accepting Jack's presence as non-threatening. The mare's eyes, though still pained, showed more alertness. She was a fighter. Doc Harrison's examination revealed more than just trap injuries. The mare showed signs of previous stress, possibly from repeated close encounters with humans in areas she'd considered safe. Her teeth were good, her overall condition healthy except for the leg, but something had made her wary long before the trap caught her. Someone's been disturbing the high country, Doc said, running his hands over the mare's shoulder. The wild horses up there have been acting strange for months. I've heard reports from hikers and hunters. The herds are moving to different areas, avoiding places they've used for generations. Jack filed that information away. It matched what he'd been observing, the changing patterns, the sense that something fundamental had shifted in the mountain's rhythm. Carlos had been asking questions among the ranch hands and seasonal workers who moved through the valley. The stories they told painted a consistent picture. Strange equipment moving on forest roads at night, sections of trails suddenly closed without explanation, security personnel appearing in areas that had never needed security. Miguel worked construction in Butte last year, Carlos reported one evening as they checked fences. He says the equipment he's seen heading into the mountains matches what mining companies use for exploratory work. Core sample drills, ground-penetrating radar arrays, the kind of stuff that costs serious money. Rita said the Forest Service authorized geological surveys, but did they authorize trap lines? Did they authorize security patrols that intimidate hikers? Carlos shook his head. Something doesn't match up between what's permitted and what's actually happening. That night, Jack decided to patrol his own property. He'd been ranching too long to ignore the instincts that told him danger was close. He dressed in dark clothing, took a thermos of coffee and a pair of night vision binoculars he'd kept from his army days, and settled into a position overlooking the northern boundary of his land. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant against the black sky. Jack sipped coffee and scanned the darkness. Hours passed. He was about to give up when he caught movement, 2 ATVs traveling without lights across the grassland between his property and the Forest Service boundary. Through the binoculars, he could make out 2 riders on each vehicle, all wearing dark clothing. They moved with the confidence of people who'd traveled this route many times. Jack tracked them until they disappeared into the trees, noting exactly where they entered. He waited another hour, then carefully made his way to that spot. The grass was torn by repeated tire tracks. The ATV trail continued into the forest, following a path that would eventually lead to the ridge where he'd found the trapped mare. Jack took photographs with his phone, documenting everything. Then he followed the trail on foot for maybe half a mile, moving carefully in the darkness. He found fresh disturbances in the earth, equipment caches hidden under tarps, and finally, a small clearing that had been set up as some kind of staging area. Wooden pallets held sealed plastic containers. A generator sat under a weatherproof cover. Shovels, picks, and other tools were organized with military precision. Jack photographed it all, his unease growing with each discovery. As he was about to leave, headlights flashed in the distance. Voices carried on the night air. Jack moved quickly into deeper cover, his old training kicking in. He'd learned infantry tactics in the army, skills that had seemed distant and irrelevant for decades. Now they felt immediately necessary. Two men entered the clearing, both wearing work clothes and headlamps. They spoke in low voices but not quietly enough that Jack couldn't hear. "The trap got triggered 3 days ago," one said. "Whatever was in it got removed. Boss wants to know if it was Forest Service or local law. Could have been that rancher, Mercer. His property's close and he's been asking questions in town. Mercer's just an old cowboy. He's not our problem. Maybe. But the boss doesn't like complications. Says we're close to wrapping up the survey work. Another month and we'll have what we need to make the case for full extraction permits. A month's a long time. Lot could go wrong." They collected items from the containers, loaded them onto their ATV, and departed. Jack waited 30 minutes before moving, giving them time to clear the area completely. His mind was racing. Survey work leading to extraction permits, a month timeline. The casual dismissal of him as not our problem. He photographed the clearing again, noting which containers had been accessed. Then he made his way back to his truck, which he'd left nearly 2 miles away. The drive home took him past Tom Whitfield's ranch. Lights were on in Tom's barn, unusual for 3 in the morning. Jack slowed but didn't stop. Whatever Tom was involved in, confronting him directly wasn't the answer. Not yet. At home, Jack uploaded the photographs to his computer and backed them up to a thumb drive. Then he called Rita's cell phone, leaving a voicemail with a brief description of what he'd seen. Sleep didn't come easily. He kept thinking about the mayor and Foal, about the men discussing timelines and permits, about the casual way they dismissed him as a threat. That dismissal stung his pride a little, but more importantly, it was a tactical advantage. If they underestimated him, he could work more freely. The next morning, Deputy Marcus Webb arrived at the ranch. He was young, maybe 30, earnest and still idealistic about law enforcement. Rita had sent him to follow up on Jack's report. "Sheriff wants me to see the staging area you found," Marcus said, accepting coffee on the porch. They drove as close as they could, then hiked in. The clearing looked exactly as Jack had left it, except for one detail: someone had been there since his visit. The containers had been moved, the generator was gone, and the tracks had been partially obscured. "They're cleaning up," Marcus said, photographing what remained. "Probably saw your tracks and knew someone had found them. Does that mean they'll shut down operations? More likely they'll move them. These people have resources and planning. They won't just give up because one location got compromised. They searched the area thoroughly, finding trace evidence, but nothing as substantial as what Jack had documented the previous night." Marcus took samples of disturbed earth, photographed everything, and made detailed notes. "I'll write this up for Rita," he said as they hiked back out. "But Jack, you need to understand something. Even if we prove illegal activity, jurisdiction is complicated. This is federal land. We can observe and report, but actual enforcement might have to come from federal agencies. And those agencies don't always move quickly. How long are we talking? Weeks, maybe months if they fight it through administrative processes." Jack thought about the men's conversation. A month until they had what they needed. The timeline felt deliberate, planned to exploit exactly the kind of bureaucratic delays Marcus was describing. What if they finish whatever they're doing before the federal agencies act? Marcus's silence was answer enough. Back at the ranch, Jack called Sarah again. This time, he told her everything: the trapped mare, the staging area, the overheard conversation. "Dad, this sounds dangerous. These aren't amateurs, I know that. But I also know that if I don't do something, they'll finish their survey work and start the real extraction. By the time anyone official notices, the damage will be done. What can you do that the sheriff can't? I can gather evidence, I can document what's happening, and I can make noise until someone with real authority pays attention." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I have a friend in the EPA's regional office. Let me make some calls. But promise me you won't do anything reckless. Define reckless. Dad, I'll be careful, I promise." After they hung up, Jack sat at his desk and organized what he knew. The pattern was clear now: illegal exploration for mineral deposits, systematic intimidation through trap lines and security patrols, local collaboration to provide cover and access, and a timeline designed to stay ahead of regulatory oversight. He was one man against an organized operation backed by significant resources. But he had something they didn't. He knew this land, knew its rhythms and secrets. He had community connections they couldn't replicate. And he had the kind of stubborn determination that came from spending a lifetime making a stand. The mare and her foal represented something worth fighting for. So did the land itself, the wild places Elena had loved. Jack wasn't naive enough to think he could win alone, but he was stubborn enough to try. The burner phone appeared on Jack's property 2 days later. Carlos found it wedged in the fence near the boundary line, its battery dead but the device intact. They charged it in the barn, neither man saying much as they waited for it to power up. When the screen lit, they found dozens of text messages in code, plus GPS coordinates marking locations throughout the valley. Jack wrote down every coordinate while Carlos photographed the messages. Someone had been careless, or perhaps the phone had been deliberately left where it would be found. "This could be a trap," Carlos said. "Leave a phone full of misleading information. See who bites. Or it could be someone with a conscience trying to blow the whistle." Jack pocketed the list of coordinates. "Either way, we need to know what these locations are." Sheriff Rita arrived within the hour. She examined the phone with gloved hands, her expression unreadable. "This goes into evidence immediately. But Jack, before I take it, tell me you documented everything. Photographed every screen. Wrote down every coordinate." "Good. Because once this is in the evidence chain, it's out of my hands. Could take weeks to get a warrant to search the contents properly." Rita's frustration was evident. The system works, but slowly. Too slowly for what you're facing. They spread Jack's old surveyor map on the hood of Rita's truck and marked the coordinates. The pattern was clear. The locations formed a grid covering the high country, with particular concentration around ridgelines and old mining claims from the 19th century. "Rare earth deposits tend to cluster in specific geological formations," Rita said. "Looks like they've identified potential sites and are doing systematic surveys." Mary from the general store called Rita's phone. "Sheriff, you need to get to the town hall. Emergency council meeting just got called. People are upset." They drove into Cedar Ridge together. The town hall parking lot was full, trucks and cars crammed into every available space. Inside, nearly 200 people packed the meeting room, their voices raised in argument and concern. Tom Whitfield stood at the front with 3 strangers in expensive outdoor wear. Town Council President Dale Morrison tried to maintain order, his gavel falling repeatedly without effect. "Let's hear what they have to say," someone shouted. "We've heard enough promises," another voice called back. "They're tearing up the mountains." Rita made her way to the front, Jack following. The strangers turned to look at them, their expressions polite but watchful. The lead man extended his hand to Rita. "Sheriff, I'm Craig Vance with Cascade Resource Management. We're here to address community concerns about our geological survey work. Your illegal trap lines would be a good place to start," Rita said, ignoring his hand. The room erupted. Vance's expression tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "I don't know anything about trap lines. Our work is entirely above board, properly permitted through the Forest Service." "Then you won't mind explaining why your people are operating staging areas on federal land without proper site identification or safety protocols?" "I'd be happy to address that in private, Sheriff. This isn't the appropriate venue." "The hell it isn't," Jack said, his voice cutting through the noise. The room quieted. People turned to look at him. "You want to talk permits and protocols? Fine. But first explain why a wild mare nearly died in one of your traps." Vance's eyes went cold. "Mr. Mercer, I presume. I've heard about your recent activities. Trespassing on posted areas, interfering with legitimate business operations. Saving an animal from an illegal trap isn't interference, it's basic human decency." The crowd murmured agreement. Tom Whitfield stepped forward, his face flushed. "Jack's been making trouble for everyone. He can't accept that some of us see economic opportunity here." "Opportunity built on what?" Jack turned to face his neighbor. "Destroying the watershed? Running off the wildlife? Bringing in people who set bear traps in horse country? That trap had nothing to do with our operation," Vance interjected smoothly. "Could have been poachers. Could have been old equipment from previous mining operations. You're making assumptions without evidence." Rita pulled out her phone and displayed photos of the staging area. "This evidence enough? Time-stamped photographs of your equipment, your supplies, your systematic operation on federal land." Vance barely glanced at the photos. Again, Sheriff, I'm happy to address your questions through proper channels, but I'm not going to be ambushed at a town meeting. Then maybe you should have disclosed your plans to the community instead of sneaking around in the dark, Mary said from the back. Her voice carried authority that made Vance pause. The meeting devolved into shouting matches between those who saw potential jobs and revenue and those who feared environmental destruction. Dale Morrison finally declared a recess, promising to schedule a proper presentation from Cascade Resource Management within 2 weeks. As people filed out, Jack found himself surrounded by neighbors he'd known for decades. Some were supportive, others critical. The valley was dividing over promises of economic development versus preservation of the land. An older man named Henry Carmichael pulled Jack aside. Henry had worked in the copper mines up in Butte before they closed, seen what industrial extraction could do to land and community. Be careful, Jack. I've seen this before. Companies come in with promises, extract what they want, and leave behind poison and unemployment. But they're good at dividing people, making neighbors suspicious of each other. How do I fight that? Facts. Documentation. Show people what's really at stake before it's too late. After the meeting, Jack sat with Rita in her office. She pulled out a map and marked locations where she'd received reports of unusual activity. I've been tracking this for 6 weeks, she admitted. Started noticing patterns after Doc Harrison mentioned the wildlife disturbances, but Jack, I need you to understand something. These people have lawyers, permits, and political connections. Even when they break the law, they have ways of making it complicated and expensive to prosecute. So what do? We build an airtight case. Federal environmental crimes, illegal trapping, fraud if we can prove they misrepresented their activities to get permits. But it takes time and evidence, time we might not have. Rita nodded grimly. Which is why I'm glad Sarah's making calls to the EPA. Federal agencies have resources we don't. But they also have procedures that can't be rushed. Jack left the sheriff's office feeling the weight of what they were up against. He drove to Doc Harrison's clinic to check on the mare. She was standing now, weight carefully off her injured leg, but standing. The foal nursed contentedly. She's tougher than I expected, Doc said. Another week and I think she could be moved to your ranch for continued recovery. My ranch might not be the safest place anymore. Safer than here. I've had 2 strangers come by asking about her, wanting to know who brought her in. I told them to talk to Rita, but they didn't seem interested in official channels. Jack felt protective anger surge. They threatened you? Not directly, but the implication was clear. They don't want attention, drawn to what happened to this horse. That evening, Jack organized what he'd learned. The burner phone coordinates, the photographs, Rita's investigation, the community meeting. He was building a picture of systematic illegal activity, but also of community division and institutional obstacles. Sarah called with news from her EPA contact. They're interested, Dad. Rachel Torres, the agent I spoke with, has been tracking similar operations in 3 other states. She thinks this could be part of a larger pattern of companies exploiting regulatory gaps. Will she help? She's requesting permission to open a preliminary investigation, but she warned me it could take weeks just to get approval. Weeks. Always weeks. Jack thought about the timeline he'd overheard. 1 month until the survey work was complete. They were losing the race against time. Sarah, I need to ask you something. How much danger am I actually in? His daughter's pause told him everything. Companies like this don't usually resort to violence, but they will use intimidation, legal harassment, economic pressure. They'll make your life difficult in ways that are hard to prove or fight. I can handle difficult. I know you can. Just promise me you won't take unnecessary risks. After they hung up, Jack walked out to his porch. The mountains rose dark against the starlit sky, solid and eternal seeming, but he knew better now. Nothing was permanent when enough money and ambition focused on tearing it down. The mare and foal represented innocence caught in machinery neither could understand. Jack understood it, though. He'd seen enough of the world to know how power worked, how systems could be gamed, how destruction could be packaged as progress. Understanding didn't make him less determined. If anything, it made him more so. Jack and Carlos conducted their reconnaissance on a moonless night, both men dressed in dark layers against the autumn cold. They'd planned carefully, studying satellite imagery, identifying approach routes, preparing equipment. Jack's old military training mixed with Carlos's hunting experience to create effective tactics. They left Jack's truck 5 miles from their destination and traveled on foot through terrain that would defeat casual followers. Jack moved with surprising quietness for a man his age, years of walking this land giving him instinctive knowledge of where to place each step. The coordinates from the burner phone led them to a ridge above what had been called Silver Creek Valley since the 1880s. As they approached, Jack spotted something that made him stop and signal Carlos to freeze. Cameras, small, weatherproof, mounted in trees with clear views of the approaches. They circled wide, using the terrain to stay in blind spots, and came up on the site from above. What Jack saw made his breath catch. This wasn't a small exploration operation. It was a full-scale survey camp with equipment that must have cost millions. 3 large tents formed a base camp. Solar panels and a diesel generator provided power. A drilling rig stood inactive but ready, the kind used for deep core sampling. Ground-penetrating radar equipment sat under tarps. Most telling were the dozens of sample containers, carefully labeled and organized, representing months of systematic work. Jack photographed everything with a camera Carlos had borrowed from his nephew, a high-resolution model that worked well in low light. He documented the equipment, the sample labels, the maps pinned inside the tents showing survey grids that covered thousands of acres. One map in particular caught his attention. It showed mineral deposit concentrations, with areas marked in red indicating highest value. The largest red zone sat directly under the watershed that fed the Madison River. Extracting those deposits would require methods that could devastate the water system for hundreds of miles downstream. "This is bigger than we thought," Carlos whispered. "This isn't exploratory. This is planning for full industrial extraction." Inside one tent, Jack found documents that confirmed his worst fears. Technical reports detailing rare earth element concentrations that exceeded their expectations. Financial projections showing potential profits in the billions. And perhaps most damning, a communications log showing coordination with federal officials, mentions of streamlined permitting, and references to political pressure being applied to expedite approvals. He photographed every page, working quickly but carefully. Outside, Carlos kept watch, his body language tense. They'd been in the camp for 20 minutes when headlights appeared on the access road. Jack and Carlos moved immediately, slipping out of the tent and into the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter. They watched as 2 vehicles arrived, a heavy-duty pickup and an SUV with government plates. 4 men emerged, Craig Vance from Cascade Resource Management, 2 others in corporate outdoor wear, and a man in his 50s wearing Forest Service uniform. They entered the largest tent, and voices carried in the cold air, not quite clear enough to understand completely. Jack edged closer, staying in shadows, using skills he hadn't needed in 40 years. He got close enough to hear fragments of conversation. "Results are even better than initial surveys suggested. Need another 3 weeks to complete the grid. Environmental review can be managed. We have friends in the regional office. Mercer's becoming a problem. He's got the sheriff asking questions, just an old rancher, no real influence." Jack felt his jaw tighten at that dismissal. The Forest Service official said something about maintaining proper documentation, about being careful not to create obvious violations that could derail the project later. "We've been careful," Vance assured him. "A few hikers see equipment, so what? By the time anyone organizes opposition, we'll have permits locked in. Then it's a matter of inevitability. Jobs, tax revenue, national security arguments about rare earth independence. No local sheriff or rancher is going to stop that momentum." Jack had heard enough. He signaled Carlos and they withdrew carefully, putting distance between themselves and the camp before moving at normal speed. The hike back to the truck took 2 hours, both men silent with the weight of what they'd learned. In the truck, Carlos finally spoke. "They've got someone in the Forest Service working with them. That's how they're getting away with all of this. And probably others in the permitting process. This is organized corruption, not just corporate overreach." Jack started the engine but sat for a moment before driving. "Carlos, I need to say something. This is about to get more dangerous. You have a family. If you want to step back, I understand. Carlos looked at him steadily. My kids will grow up in this valley. What kind of place will it be if we let people destroy it for profit? I'm in, Jack. All the way. They drove back in darkness, Jack's mind working through implications. Corrupt officials changed everything. It wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. It was about finding people in authority who weren't compromised, building a case that couldn't be buried by internal review processes. At home, Jack uploaded the photographs to his computer and burned multiple copies to thumb drives. He packaged one drive with detailed notes and addressed it to Sarah. Another went to Rita. A third he placed in a safe deposit box at the bank. Sarah called as he was finishing. Dad, Rachel Torres got approval to open a preliminary investigation. She's flying out to Montana next week. Next week might be too late. I found their main survey camp tonight. They're 3 weeks from finishing. He described what he'd seen and heard. Sarah listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. The Forest Service official. Did you get a name? No, but I got his face. Carlos recognized him from town council meetings. Guy named Robert Hendricks, regional administrator. That's significant. A federal official actively coordinating with a mining company represents serious criminal exposure. But Dad, it also means they have more resources than we thought. I know. No, I mean, these people can make your life very difficult. They can tie you up in lawsuits, challenge your land title, create problems with your water rights. They have tools we can't match. Jack thought about Elena's journal, about the wild mare and her foal, about 40 years of his life invested in this place. Then we use the tools we do have. Public pressure, media attention, federal investigation. Make enough noise that they can't operate in the shadows anymore. Sarah's voice softened. You sound like Mom. She never backed down either. She taught me well. After hanging up, Jack opened Elena's journal to a passage he'd read many times. Her handwriting flowed across the page in the entry from their 20th anniversary. Jack believes in doing what's right even when it's hard. It's one of the things I love most about him. He doesn't calculate odds or worry about being outmatched. He just does what his conscience demands. I hope if I'm ever gone, that core of integrity stays strong. The land needs men like him. Jack closed the journal carefully. Elena had known him perhaps better than he knew himself. She'd understood that when pushed, he wouldn't bend. Some men were built to compromise, to find middle ground. Jack had tried to be that kind of man for most of his life. But there were limits, lines that couldn't be crossed. Cascade Resource Management and their corrupt partners had crossed those lines. They'd set traps that hurt innocent animals. They'd lied to the community. They'd corrupted officials and planned destruction that would poison the watershed for generations. Jack had been a soldier once, trained to face opposition with strategy and determination. He'd been a rancher for 40 years, learning patience and persistence. Now he needed to be both. A patient strategist who understood that some battles couldn't be avoided, only fought with everything you had. The mare was healing in Doc Harrison's clinic. The foal grew stronger every day. They represented resilience, the ability of living things to recover from violence if given a chance. Jack intended to give the land that same chance, whatever it took. Sarah arrived unannounced 3 days later, her rental car pulling into the ranch just after dawn. Jack was feeding horses when he heard the engine, and his first reaction was alarm. Sarah never came home without calling first. He walked to meet her, and she got out of the car with a determined expression he recognized from Elena. You didn't need to come all this way, he said, pulling her into a hug. Yes, I did. Rachel Torres is coming tomorrow. We need to prepare everything. Organize all your evidence into something a federal agent can actually use. And Dad, I need to be here. This is my home too. They spent the morning laying out everything Jack had collected. Photographs, maps, the burner phone data, witness statements from other ranchers, Doc Harrison's veterinary reports on the mare. Sarah organized it all with the precision of an attorney building a case, creating timelines and chains of evidence. This is good work, she said, examining the photos from the survey camp. But we need more context. We need to show environmental impact, not just illegal activity. Your mother's journal, Jack said suddenly. She documented everything about this valley's ecology for 20 years. They retrieved Elena's journals from Jack's study. There were 15 of them, leather-bound volumes filled with her careful observations. Sarah opened one at random and found herself reading her mother's description of a spring wildflower bloom from 8 years earlier. She was so thorough, Sarah said softly. Every detail, every change. Together they began comparing Elena's observations to current conditions. The differences were stark. Water sources Elena had documented as clear and strong were now reduced or contaminated. Plant species she'd noted as abundant were declining. Wildlife patterns had shifted dramatically. "Look at this," Jack said, pointing to an entry from 3 years ago. Elena documented a family of black bears using a specific denning area. Last fall, Carlos saw that area completely torn up, the den destroyed. By the survey work? Had to be. There's core drilling equipment visible in satellite photos from that same ridge. Sarah photographed Elena's journal pages, cross-referencing them with Jack's documentation of current conditions. The pattern of environmental degradation was undeniable when viewed through the lens of Elena's careful record-keeping. "Mom would be furious," Sarah said. "She loved this place so much. She did, and she'd want us to fight for it." They worked through lunch and into the afternoon. Sarah made calls to environmental law contacts, asking technical questions about federal jurisdiction and enforcement procedures. Jack organized physical evidence, creating a systematic presentation of what they'd discovered. Carlos joined them for dinner, and the three of them sat around the table discussing strategy. Maria, Carlos's wife, had sent over a pot of green chili stew, and they ate while reviewing plans. "Rachel Torres has a reputation," Sarah said. "She doesn't take on cases unless she thinks she can win. The fact that she's coming personally instead of sending a junior agent means she sees real potential here." "What does she need from us?" Carlos asked. "Everything we have, plus any additional evidence we can gather in the next 24 hours. And testimony. She'll want statements from everyone who's witnessed illegal activity or been intimidated." "I can get you a list of people," Carlos said. "Ranch hands who've seen things, hikers who've been turned back by security that had no authority, property owners who've received threatening letters." After dinner, Jack and Sarah sat on the porch. The temperature had dropped, their breath visible in the cold air. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light. "I miss this," Sarah admitted. "Denver's exciting, the work's challenging, but I miss this sky. I miss knowing my neighbors. I miss feeling connected to something bigger than quarterly billing requirements." "You thinking about coming home?" "I'm thinking about what home means. I built a life in Denver, but it doesn't feed my soul the way this place does." She leaned against the porch post, looking out at the mountains. "Mom's journal reminded me of something. She wrote about choosing what matters, about investing your life in things that last. I've been investing in things that pay well but don't last." Jack understood. He'd made a similar choice at her age, leaving behind Army career opportunities to return to the ranch. People had told him he was wasting his potential, that ranching was dying. Maybe they'd been right about the economics, but they'd been wrong about what gave life meaning. "Your mother and I always wanted you to be happy, whatever form that took. If Denver makes you happy, stay there. If you need to come home, there's always a place for you here. What if there's no here to come home to? What if Cascade destroys it? Then we'll rebuild. That's what people do. We build. We fight for what matters. And when necessary, we rebuild." Sarah wiped her eyes. "I read an entry in Mom's journal from when I was little. She wrote about taking me up to see the wild horses, about how my eyes lit up when we spotted a herd. She wrote that she hoped I'd always remember that feeling, that sense of wonder at seeing something wild and free. I remember that day. You were maybe 6 years old. We hiked up to Eagle's Rest and there was a herd of 15 horses in the meadow below. You were so excited you couldn't speak. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not just property rights or water quality, but preserving that sense of wonder. Keeping places where people can still experience wildness." Jack nodded. "Your mother understood that. She knew the land had value beyond what it could produce economically, and she knew that once you destroy wildness, you can't get it back. You can restore habitat, rebuild populations, but you can't recreate that original magic." They sat in comfortable silence, father and daughter united in purpose. Inside, Jack's phone rang. It was Rita. "Jack, you need to know something. Robert Hendricks filed a formal complaint against you, claims you've been trespassing on Forest Service land, interfering with authorized survey work, and making threats against federal employees." "That's a lie. I know it is. But he's got paperwork, statements from Cascade employees backing his version. They're building a legal case to discredit you before Torres arrives. Can they do that?" "They can try. But Jack, this confirms they see you as a real threat. They wouldn't bother with legal harassment if they thought you were harmless." After hanging up, Jack told Sarah about the complaint. She shook her head, but she was smiling slightly. "That's actually good news. It shows desperation. They're worried enough about what Torres might find that they're trying to undermine your credibility preemptively. But it also means they have sources inside the investigation. Someone told them Torres was coming. How do we counter it? By being absolutely clean from here on. No more nighttime reconnaissance, no trespassing even on public land without explicit permission, nothing they can use to paint you as a vigilante. We give Torres everything and let federal authority take over." Jack knew she was right, but it grated against his instincts. He'd been taking direct action, and direct action had produced results. Stepping back felt like surrender. Sarah read his expression. "Dad, you've done the hard part. You found the evidence. You exposed the corruption. You made enough noise that the federal government got involved. Now it's time to let the system work. And if the system fails, then we find another approach. But let's give it a chance first. Mom always said you were stubborn but not stupid. Don't be stupid." Jack laughed despite himself. Elena had said that exact phrase more times than he could count. It was her way of telling him when determination had crossed into recklessness. "All right," he agreed. "We do this by the book, but I'm keeping my eyes open. If Cascade tries anything, I want to be ready." "Fair enough. Now let's get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As Sarah headed inside, Jack stayed on the porch a few minutes longer. He thought about Elena's journals, about the accumulated wisdom of 20 years of careful observation. She'd been teaching him even then, showing him how to see beyond the immediate to the long patterns that really mattered. The mayor and Foal were healing at Doc Harrison's clinic. The federal investigation was beginning. The evidence was organized and documented. For the first time since finding that trap, Jack felt like they might actually have a chance. But he also knew that cornered animals were most dangerous. Cascade Resource Management wasn't going to give up billions of dollars without a fight. And from what he'd seen, they were willing to fight dirty. Sheriff Rita Gonzalez arrived at Jack's ranch just after sunrise, her expression grim in a way that made Jack's stomach tighten. Sarah was already up, making coffee, and she read Rita's face immediately. What happened? Rita sat at the kitchen table heavily. "Tom Whitfield filed a complaint last night. Claims Jack has been trespassing on his property, harassing him, making threats. He's got documentation, dates and times, a lawyer from Billings backing him up." "That's absurd," Jack said. "I've barely spoken to Tom in months. It gets worse." Rita pulled out her tablet and showed them legal documents. "Cascade Resource Management filed a civil suit this morning. They're suing you for interference with legitimate business operations, claiming your accusations have damaged their reputation and delayed their work. They're seeking $2 million in damages." Sarah took the tablet, her lawyer's eyes scanning the documents rapidly. Her face went pale. "This is sophisticated. Multiple causes of action, careful documentation, witness statements. This isn't reactive. This was planned." "There's more," Rita said quietly. "I've been investigating Tom Whitfield's finances. Got a warrant based on suspicious activity reports. Jack, he's not a victim in this. He's a partner." She laid out bank statements, transfer records, corporate filings. Tom Whitfield's name appeared on partnership agreements with Cascade Resource Management dating back 18 months. He'd received payments totaling over $300,000. His property provided crucial access to the richest mineral deposits, and he'd known about it from the beginning. "He played us," Jack said slowly. "All those conversations about financial troubles, about being pressured by outsiders. It was theater. Worse than that. Look at this." Rita showed them communications between Tom and Cascade executives. He's been feeding them information. When you started asking questions, he reported it. When you found the trap, he told them. When Sarah contacted the EPA, he somehow knew and warned them. How did he know about the EPA contact? Sarah asked. That's what worries me. Either he's got sources inside federal agencies or Cascade does. Either way, they've been a step ahead because Tom's been watching and reporting everything happening in this valley. Jack felt betrayal settle in his chest like cold iron. Tom Whitfield had been his neighbor for 30 years. They'd helped each other through droughts and hard winters, had shared coffee and conversation, had lived the unspoken code of rural life where neighbors looked out for each other. What else is he involved in? Jack asked. Rita's expression darkened further. The trap lines were set on his property, with his permission. He knew about them, probably helped place them. His story about financial troubles was cover for why he'd suddenly partner with outsiders. And Jack, he's not alone. I've identified 3 other landowners who took money from Cascade in exchange for access and silence. Sarah was still studying the documents. These payments are structured to look like legitimate consulting fees or lease agreements, but the amounts are too large, the timing too convenient. This is bribery disguised as business. Can you prove that? Jack asked. Maybe, but it'll take months and they've got lawyers who specialize in making this kind of thing look legal. Rita pulled up another document. Here's where it gets really complicated. Tom filed for a special use permit 6 months ago, claiming he wanted to do agricultural research. That permit gives him and his partners access to federal land adjacent to his property. That's how Cascade has been operating so freely. They're technically on land Tom has legal access to. Agricultural research, Sarah said bitterly. That's fraud. Those permits require specific plans and oversight. The oversight official is Robert Hendricks, the Forest Service administrator who's been coordinating with Cascade. Rita closed her tablet. This is a web of corruption spanning multiple agencies and institutions. The people who are supposed to protect public land have been bought or intimidated into looking the other way. Jack stood and walked to the window. Outside, his horses grazed peacefully. The mountains rose eternal in the distance. Everything looked normal, but the foundation had shifted. His neighbor was his enemy. Officials were corrupt. The rules he'd believed in had been perverted. Who else knows about this? He asked. Just us, for now. And Jack, you need to understand something. With Tom and others cooperating with Cascade, they know everything we're doing. Every conversation in town, every person we talk to, every move we make gets reported back. Sarah set down the documents. This changes our strategy completely. We can't trust local channels. Everything has to go directly to federal authorities, and even then, we have to be careful about who we contact. Agent Torres arrives today, Rita said. She's our best option, but I'm betting Cascade already knows she's coming. As if on cue, Jack's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered. Craig Vance's smooth voice came through the speaker. Mr. Mercer, I think it's time we had a conversation. I've got nothing to say to you. That's unfortunate, because I have quite a bit to say to you. You're facing serious legal consequences, Jack. $2 million in damages, possible criminal charges for trespassing and harassment. You could lose your ranch. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. You won't intimidate me. I'm not trying to intimidate you. I'm trying to help you understand reality. You're one man fighting against forces you don't understand. We have resources, political connections, legal teams. This fight will destroy you. Then why are you calling? If you're so confident, why bother? There was a pause. Because destruction is wasteful. I'm authorized to make you an offer. Drop your opposition, sign an NDA, and we'll not only drop the lawsuit, we'll buy your property for 3 times its market value. You can retire to Florida, watch sunsets, let other people worry about Montana. My home is not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. Think about it. Your daughter standing there with you, she's a smart lawyer. She'll tell you this is a good deal. We get what we need, you get financial security, nobody has to get hurt. Is that a threat? It's a business negotiation. But Jack, you should know that accidents happen. Equipment malfunctions, wild animals attack livestock, buildings catch fire. The mountains are dangerous. People who don't understand that end up getting hurt. Jack's voice went cold. You threaten me, you threaten my family, you threaten my property, and you expect me to negotiate? I expect you to be smart. But if you're determined to be stubborn, that's your choice. Just remember, I offered you a way out." The line went dead. Jack set the phone down, carefully aware that Sarah and Rita were watching him. "They threatened you," Sarah said flatly. Not in words they couldn't deny, but yes. Rita stood. "That's it. I'm requesting federal protection for you both. This has escalated beyond local law enforcement. Protection won't stop them," Jack said. "These people set bear traps in horse country. They corrupt government officials. They threaten families. Protection just delays what they'll eventually try." "So what do you want to do?" Sarah asked. Jack thought about Tom Whitfield, about 30 years of neighborliness that had been a lie, about officials who'd sworn to protect public land but sold out for money, about companies that viewed destruction as just another line item in a profit calculation. "I want to destroy them," he said quietly, "not physically, but legally, financially, publicly. I want to expose every corrupt deal, every bribed official, every illegal act. I want to make them the example that stops the next company from thinking they can get away with this." Rita nodded slowly. "Then we need Torres to move fast. We need federal charges filed before Cascade can intimidate more witnesses or destroy evidence. And we need the media," Sarah added. "Public pressure. Make this so visible they can't operate in shadows anymore." They spent the next hour preparing for Agent Torres's arrival. Jack organized physical evidence, while Sarah drafted a comprehensive timeline. Rita coordinated with federal authorities, arranging secure meeting locations and communication protocols. When Tom Whitfield's truck drove past on the road, Jack watched from the window. He could see Tom's profile, the man he'd thought he knew. Now Tom was a stranger wearing a familiar face. The betrayal stung worse than the threats. Carlos arrived and Jack told him everything. Carlos's expression hardened as he listened. "My cousin works on Tom's ranch. I can get information, find out what they're planning next." "Carefully," Sarah warned. "If Tom figures out someone's feeding us information, he'll use it against us." "I'll be careful. But Jack, you should know something. People in town are talking. Most of them don't trust Cascade, but they're scared. Jobs are scarce, money's tight. Cascade's promising both. That's powerful." "Then we show them what those promises cost," Jack said. "We show them the contaminated water, the destroyed habitat, the lies and corruption. We give them truth and trust they'll make the right choice. And if they don't?" Jack looked at the mountains one more time. "Then we fight anyway, because some things are worth fighting for even if you stand alone." But he wasn't alone. Sarah was here. Carlos stood with him. Rita was risking her career. Agent Torres was coming. The community might be divided, but he had allies. And somewhere up in those mountains a mare was healing, and her foal was growing stronger. They'd survived the trap. Maybe Jack could too. The letter arrived by courier later that morning, hand-delivered in a heavy envelope marked urgent, legal notice. Jack opened it at his kitchen table with Sarah and Carlos watching. The message was brief and chilling. "Your daughter's apartment in Denver had a break-in last night. Nothing was taken. Sometimes these things are just warnings about what could happen if someone isn't careful. Choose wisely." Sarah's face went white. "They broke into my apartment." "Did they?" Jack asked. "Or are they lying to scare us?" Sarah pulled out her phone and called her neighbor in Denver. The conversation was brief. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. "Mrs. Patterson said the police were there last night. Someone jimmied my back door but apparently didn't take anything. She thought it was just random." "It wasn't random," Rita said from the doorway. She'd let herself in when no one answered her knock. "I just got a report from Denver PD. Professional job, no prints, no witnesses. They went through your files, photographed documents, then left." This is intimidation tactics. Jack felt protective rage rise in his chest, but he forced it down. Anger was what they wanted. Anger made people reckless. "Sarah, you're staying here, not going back to Denver until this is resolved." "Dad, I have cases, responsibilities. Your safety is more important. If they're willing to break into your apartment, they're capable of worse." Carlos stood. "I'll call my brothers." We can set up a watch rotation, make sure someone's always here. And I'm installing security cameras, Rita added. The county will pay for it considering the threats. Jack, you also need to vary your routines. Don't be predictable. They spent the afternoon turning Jack's ranch into a defensible position. Carlos and his brothers installed motion sensors on the approaches. Rita arranged for patrol cars to make regular passes. Jack checked his rifles and made sure his ammunition was current, something he hadn't worried about in years. Sarah worked the phone, coordinating with Agent Torres, arranging secure communication channels, building legal documentation of the threats. Her initial fear had transformed into focused determination, and Jack recognized Elena's stubbornness in his daughter's expression. By evening, the ranch felt different. Not home anymore, but a fortress. Jack stood on his porch as the sun set, hating what his life had become. He was a rancher, not a soldier. He wanted to feed horses and fix fences, not install security cameras and sleep with a loaded rifle nearby. Carlos joined him. The horses sense something's wrong. They're skittish. Animals always know. They read tension better than we do. My wife wants us to leave, take the kids somewhere safe until this is over. I told her I'm staying. You should go, Carlos. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. This valley is my home too. My kids will grow up here. What kind of example do I set if I run when things get hard? Jack gripped his friend's shoulder, words unnecessary between men who'd worked together for 15 years. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about threats and choices, about the mare healing at Doc Harrison's clinic, about Elena's journal entries describing a valley that no longer existed. At 2 in the morning, he got up and reviewed all their evidence, making sure everything was documented and backed up. He'd just finished when motion sensors triggered. Carlos was out the door before Jack could react, rifle ready, but it was just a deer, spooked by the unfamiliar equipment. False alarm, Carlos called, but it proves the system works. Back inside, Jack made coffee and they sat at the kitchen table. How did we get here? Jack asked. 3 weeks ago I was a rancher worried about fixing fences. Now I'm installing security and sleeping with weapons. You found something they wanted hidden. That's all it takes. Should I have just ignored it? Let the mare die, pretended I didn't see what I saw? Could you have done that? Jack shook his head. No, I couldn't. Then you did the only thing you could do. Sometimes that's all any of us can manage. Dawn came slowly. Sarah emerged looking like she hadn't slept either. Rita arrived with Doc Harrison, who'd brought news about the mare. She's healing faster than expected, Doc said. The foal is thriving. I think they could be moved here in a few days if you want them. Is it safe? Sarah asked. Safer than my clinic. I've had strangers asking about them again. At least here you've got security. They decided to bring the mare and foal to Jack's ranch. Doc would make daily visits to monitor the mare's recovery. The foal needed her mother, and keeping them together was essential for both animals' well-being. Rita shared updates on her investigation. I've identified 7 landowners who took money from Cascade. 3 are willing to talk, 4 are scared. The ones willing to talk are enough to establish a pattern. Will that help Torres build a case? It'll help. But we need more. We need hard evidence of the illegal activity, not just financial records. The trap, the staging area, the communications you photographed. That's what will make federal charges stick. Agent Rachel Torres arrived that afternoon, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who didn't waste time. She listened to their presentation without interrupting, examined every piece of evidence, asked pointed questions that revealed a keen understanding of environmental law. When they finished, she sat back and looked at each of them. This is bigger than I expected. Multiple federal violations, corruption of government officials, organized fraud. If we do this right, we can shut down not just this operation, but potentially expose a pattern across multiple states. If we do this right, Jack said. What if we don't? Torres's expression hardened. Then they get away with it, and it happens again somewhere else. That's why we have to be perfect. One mistake, one piece of inadmissible evidence, one procedural error, and their lawyers will tear the case apart. What do you need from us? Everything you have, organized and documented. Sworn statements, coordination with my investigation, and patience. This won't be fast. How much time do we have? They're 3 weeks from completing their survey work. Once that's done, they'll file for extraction permits. After permits are granted, stopping them becomes exponentially harder. So realistically, we have 3 weeks to build a case strong enough to halt their operation. 3 weeks. The same timeline Jack had overheard in the survey camp. Everything was converging toward a deadline that felt both too close and impossibly far away. Agent Rachel Torres set up a temporary command center in Rita's office, spreading documents across every available surface. She worked with systematic precision, building case files that would survive legal challenges. Jack watched her organization and felt hope for the first time in days. "I've worked similar cases in Nevada and Wyoming," Torres explained, marking connections on a timeline. "Same pattern: shell corporations, corrupt local officials, exploitation of regulatory gaps. But this is the most sophisticated operation I've seen. They've learned from previous mistakes." "Can you stop them?" Sarah asked. "Yes, but it requires perfect execution. We need to coordinate raids on multiple sites simultaneously. Cascade can't be allowed to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses once they know we're coming." Torres laid out a map of the valley. Red pins marked known Cascade operations. Yellow pins showed properties owned by cooperating landowners. Blue pins indicated sites of suspected environmental violations. The survey camp Jack photographed is our primary target. We seize their equipment, their samples, their documentation. Simultaneously, we raid Tom Whitfield's property and the other collaborating landowners. We freeze corporate accounts and prevent document destruction. "That's a lot of coordination," Rita observed. "I'm bringing in teams from the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division, the Forest Service's Law Enforcement Branch, and the FBI for the corruption angle. We'll have 30 agents ready to move when I give the word." Jack felt the scope of the operation settling over him. This wasn't just about his valley anymore, it was about establishing precedent, stopping a pattern that had been repeating across the West. Torres turned to Jack and Sarah. "Your role is crucial but limited. You're witnesses, not investigators. That means no more reconnaissance, no confrontations, nothing that could be used to discredit your testimony. Just sit and wait." Jack's frustration was evident. "You've done the hard part. You exposed this operation when no one else would. Now let the system you've set in motion do its work." Torres's tone softened slightly. "I know it's difficult, but your credibility is your most valuable asset. Don't jeopardize it." Sarah touched her father's arm. "She's right, Dad. We've gathered the evidence. Now we need to protect it and ourselves." Torres pulled out a business card. "This is secure communication. If you see anything urgent, contact me directly. Don't use regular phones or email. Assume everything is monitored." "They're watching us that closely?" Sarah asked. "Cascade has invested billions in exploration rights across the West. They'll protect that investment aggressively. Your father's lawsuit is just the beginning. Expect more pressure, more intimidation. They want you to fold before the federal case materializes." Rita leaned forward. "What about protection? Jack and Sarah are exposed here." "I've arranged for a protective detail. 2 agents will be stationed nearby, rotating shifts. They'll maintain distance but respond if there's trouble." Torres fixed Jack with a serious look. "These people have crossed lines, but I don't believe they'll resort to violence. Too much scrutiny, too much risk. However, I won't gamble with your safety." The meeting continued for hours. Torres interviewed Carlos, Doc Harrison, and several other witnesses. Each testimony added layers to the case, creating a comprehensive picture of Cascade's operations. Evening came, and Torres prepared to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow with my team. We're setting up surveillance on Cascade's operations. In 3 days, we'll have monitoring equipment in place. 2 weeks after that, if everything proceeds correctly, we execute the raids." After she left, Jack sat with Sarah on the porch. The protective detail was visible now, a dark SUV parked at the edge of his property. The sight should have been reassuring, but it just emphasized how much his life had changed. "You think this will work?" he asked. "Torres knows what she's doing. She's won cases against companies bigger than Cascade." "But?" Sarah smiled slightly. "You always hear the but. Yes, there's a but. Federal cases are slow. Cascade's lawyers will fight every step. Even if we win, it could take years before the land is actually protected, years the land doesn't have. Maybe. Or maybe the threat of federal prosecution will make them back off. Sometimes the process is the punishment. Legal fees, public exposure, criminal investigations, that's expensive even for a billion-dollar company. Jack thought about Tom Whitfield, about the betrayal that still stung. Do you think Tom knew what he was getting into, or did they manipulate him? Does it matter? I suppose not. The damage is the same either way. They sat in comfortable silence watching stars emerge. Inside, Carlos made dinner for everyone. The smell of cooking meat and vegetables drifted through the open door, normal and domestic in the midst of everything. Mom would know what to say right now, Sarah said quietly. She always had perspective when things got hard. She'd tell us to stay focused on what matters, the land, the animals, the community, not the anger or fear, but the love underneath it all. Jack's voice caught slightly. She'd say that fighting for what you love is the only fight worth having. She'd also say not to be stupid about it. Jack laughed. She would definitely say that. Doc Harrison's truck arrived, and he examined the space where the mare and foal would be housed. I'll bring them tomorrow morning. The mare's ready to travel, and honestly, she'll recover better here. Horses heal faster when they're not stressed. We've got a stall prepared, and I'll be here full time, Jack assured him. That night, sleeping was easier. Not because the danger had passed, but because the path forward was clear. They had a plan, federal resources, and 3 weeks to make it work. Jack had faced worse odds in his life, though admittedly not often. He dreamed of Elena, standing in the high meadow with her journal. In the dream, she turned to him and smiled. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Don't doubt that." He woke before dawn, the dream vivid in his mind. Through the window, he could see the protective detail changing shifts. Carlos was already up, moving through his morning routine. Sarah emerged from her old room, laptop in hand, ready to coordinate legal strategies. They were ready. Whatever Cascade tried next, they were ready. Carlos brought critical intelligence 5 days into Torres's surveillance operation. His cousin, who worked on Tom Whitfield's ranch, had overheard a conversation that changed everything. "They're moving up their timeline," Carlos reported, spreading papers on Jack's kitchen table. "Cascade's finishing their survey work this week. They plan to file permit applications next Monday, 2 weeks earlier than we thought." Torres arrived within the hour, her expression grim. "This is bad. We're not ready to move. I need another week minimum to coordinate the raids properly." "What if we don't have another week?" Sarah asked. "Then we move with what we have and hope it's enough. But rushing increases the risk of procedural errors that could sink the case." Torres pulled up schedules on her tablet. "I can accelerate some things. The surveillance equipment is in place, we've got documentation of their current activities. But coordinating 30 agents across multiple agencies on short notice is complicated." Jack looked at the map Torres had marked. The survey camp, Tom's property, 3 other collaborating landowners, and the Forest Service office where Robert Hendricks worked. 5 simultaneous raids requiring perfect timing. "What's the critical element?" he asked. "What absolutely has to happen for this to succeed?" "Seizing their survey data before they transmit it to corporate headquarters. Once that data is off-site, they can file permits based on it even if we shut down their physical operations." "Can they transmit it remotely?" "They can, but it's a massive amount of data. Multiple terabytes of geological information, core samples, analysis. They'll need satellite uplinks or physical transport. We've been monitoring their communications. They're scheduled to send the final data package Friday morning." "That's in 3 days," Sarah said, "which means we raid Thursday night." Torres looked at each of them. "This is it. Thursday night we hit all 5 locations simultaneously. We seize equipment, arrest key personnel, and freeze all corporate assets. If we do it right, Cascade's entire Western operation collapses." The next 3 days were intense preparation. Torres's team installed additional surveillance, documented every movement of Cascade personnel, and built minute-by-minute schedules for the raids. Jack and Sarah provided local knowledge, identifying approach routes and potential complications. On Wednesday, Tom Whitfield made his move. He arrived at Jack's ranch unannounced, driving up in his new truck with an expression of determination. Jack met him on the porch, Carlos standing nearby. "We need to talk," Tom said. "I don't think we do, Jack, please. 5 minutes." Against his better judgment, Jack nodded. They walked to the fence line, out of easy earshot from the house. Tom looked older than Jack remembered, lines of stress deepening around his eyes. "I know you hate me," Tom began. "I probably deserve that. But you need to understand something. When Cascade came to me 18 months ago, I was 2 months from foreclosure. The bank owned everything I'd worked for. My wife was sick. Medical bills were crushing us. They offered me a way out. They offered you money to betray your neighbors. They offered me survival, and I took it because I was desperate and scared." Tom's voice cracked. "But Jack, you need to stop. These people, they're not going to let you win. They've got resources and connections you can't imagine. They're going to destroy you. Is that why you're here? To warn me?" "I'm here because I owe you that much. We've been neighbors for 30 years. I may have sold out, but I don't want to see you ruined." Jack studied Tom's face, looking for sincerity. He found it, mixed with shame and regret. "Then help us. Testify against them. Give Torres evidence of the corruption." Tom shook his head. "I can't. They've got me locked in legally. I break my agreements, I lose everything and go to prison for fraud. They structured it so I'm trapped." "You trapped yourself when you took their money, I know, and I have to live with that." Tom looked at the mountains. "This valley won't be the same after they're done. The water will never be quite as clean, the wildlife will never quite recover. I know that now, but it's too late for me to change course. It's never too late to do the right thing. For you, maybe. You've always been the righteous one, Jack, the man who does what's right no matter the cost. I admire that, I really do, but I'm not that strong." Tom turned back to his truck. "Just be careful, please." Jack watched him drive away, feeling the weight of complicated emotions, anger at the betrayal, pity for the weakness, understanding of the desperation that led good men to bad choices. Inside, Sarah had monitored the conversation through the window. "You think he was genuine?" "I think he's trapped and scared and full of regrets. But I also think he's not going to help us." Then we proceed without him. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. Torres's team gathered at a staging area 20 miles from Jack's ranch. 30 federal agents, all briefed and prepared. Jack and Sarah were there as observers, along with Rita and several deputies who would assist with the local aspects of the raids. Torres went through the plan one final time. Primary target is the survey camp. We seize all equipment, all data, all personnel. Secondary targets are the 5 properties where equipment has been stored or staging operations conducted. We execute search warrants simultaneously at 8 p.m. Questions? No one had questions. These were professionals who'd done this before, but Jack could feel the tension. This was the culmination of weeks of work, and everything depended on the next few hours. Carlos gripped Jack's shoulder. "Whatever happens tonight, you did the right thing. We'll see." As the sun set, Torres's team moved into position. Jack and Sarah waited with Rita, monitoring radio communications. The protective detail had been pulled for the raids, every available agent needed for the operation. At 7:30, Torres's voice came over the radio, "All units stand by. Execute on my mark." Jack held his breath. The minutes before 8 p.m. stretched like hours. Jack sat in Rita's office, listening to radio chatter as Torres's teams moved into final positions. Sarah paced her nervous energy, filling the small space. Carlos had returned to the ranch to maintain security there, but Jack could feel his friend's tension through the distance. "Alpha team in position at survey camp," a voice crackled through the radio. "Bravo team set at Whitfield property. Charlie team ready at Henderson site." One by one, the teams reported readiness. Torres's voice remained calm, professional, the sound of someone who'd done this many times but never took success for granted. Jack thought about the mare and foal, now safely housed in his barn. They'd adjusted well to their new home, the foal growing bolder each day, exploring its surroundings with the curiosity of young things. Doc Harrison reported the mare's leg was healing remarkably well. She might never run completely free again, but she would recover. At 7:50, Torres's voice cut through the chatter. "All teams, final equipment check. We execute in 10 minutes. Sarah stopped pacing and sat beside Jack. You okay? Nervous. This is it. Either we shut them down tonight, or they slip through our fingers. Torres knows what she's doing. I know, but so does Cascade. They didn't build a billion-dollar operation without being smart and ruthless. Rita came in with coffee, though no one really wanted it. I've got deputies positioned around town. If anyone tries to run, we'll intercept them. You think they'll run? Some will try. The lower-level people, the ones who are just following orders, they're the ones who panic. The executives, the real decision-makers, they'll lawyer up and claim ignorance. At 7:58, Torres's voice came through again. All teams stand by. Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. The radio exploded with activity. Jack heard multiple voices overlapping as teams moved simultaneously across the valley, agents announcing themselves, reading warrants, securing personnel, the choreography of a federal raid playing out in real time. Survey camp secured. Multiple subjects detained. Equipment intact. Whitfield property. Subject attempting to flee, in pursuit. Henderson site secure. Evidence located. Jack's heart pounded. It was happening. After weeks of investigation, documentation, and preparation, the machinery of justice was finally in motion. Then a different voice. Urgent, Alpha team. We have a problem. The primary server has been wiped. Data's gone. Torres's response was immediate. Check backup drives. They can't have wiped everything. Checking now. Wait, we've got something. External hard drives in a safe. Data appears intact. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Sarah squeezed his hand. The radio traffic continued for 20 minutes, a confusing overlay of reports and responses. Gradually, a picture emerged. All 5 primary sites had been secured. 17 people were in custody. Equipment and evidence had been seized. But there were complications. Tom Whitfield had attempted to flee and crashed his truck during the pursuit. He was injured but alive, now in custody at the local hospital. Robert Hendricks, the corrupt Forest Service administrator, had tried to destroy documents in his office but been stopped before significant damage was done. 3 other landowners had cooperated immediately, clearly relieved to have the pressure finally lifted. Craig Vance and the senior Cascade executives weren't at any of the raid locations. Torres had anticipated this and had teams positioned at the airport and major highways. But so far, they'd evaded capture. They knew, Jack said. Somehow they knew and got out ahead of the raids. Or they're just cautious enough to keep distance from the actual operations, Sarah countered. Plausible deniability. At 9:30, Torres returned to Rita's office. She looked tired but satisfied. We got them. Maybe not everyone we wanted, but we got enough. The evidence is solid, the operation is shut down, and we've frozen their corporate accounts. Cascade's Western exploration program is effectively dead. What about Vance and the executives? Rita asked. Warrants are issued. They'll surface eventually, probably with lawyers, but they're done operating in Montana. Torres sat heavily. Jack, Sarah, this is your victory. None of this happens without you finding that trapped mare and refusing to look away. Jack felt exhaustion wash over him. What happens now? Now comes the legal process. Grand jury indictments, probably within a month. Trials will take longer, but with the evidence we seized tonight, convictions are almost certain. Federal environmental crimes, corruption of public officials, fraud, racketeering. We're looking at decades of prison time for the key players. And the land? Jack asked. What about protecting the land? The survey data will be sealed as evidence. Cascade's permits will be revoked. The areas they identified will be subjected to environmental review. And based on what we found tonight, those reviews will almost certainly result in permanent protection. Sarah leaned forward. Almost certainly? Nothing's guaranteed in law. But the evidence of ecological damage is overwhelming. Combined with the criminal case, it'll be nearly impossible for any company to get extraction permits in this area for decades. It was better than Jack had hoped for. Not perfect, but better than seemed possible when he'd found that mare trapped and suffering. He thought about Elena's journal, about her careful documentation that had been so crucial to the case. She'd been protecting this land even after death. When can we go home? He asked. Now. The immediate danger is over. We'll maintain a presence for a few more days, but Cascade's operation is finished." Torres stood and offered her hand. "Thank you, both of you. The system worked because you made it work." Jack shook her hand. Then Sarah's, then Rita's. They'd done it. A rancher, his daughter, a sheriff, and a federal agent had taken down a billion-dollar mining operation and exposed corruption that reached into government offices. As they drove back to the ranch, Jack felt something release in his chest. Not quite relief, not yet, but the beginning of relief. The sense that maybe things would be okay. At home, Carlos was waiting on the porch. "I heard the radio traffic. We won? We won." They went to check on the mare and foal. The young horse came to the stall door immediately, no longer shy around humans. The mare stood in the back, watchful but calm, both of them healing, both of them safe. Jack ran his hand over the foal's neck, feeling the warmth of living muscle under soft fur. This was what it had all been about. Not just the horses, but what they represented. Innocence, wildness, the right of living things to exist without being destroyed by human greed. Sarah joined him at the stall. Mom would be proud. She would. They stood in the quiet barn, the crisis over but its echoes still resonating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Legal proceedings, community healing, the work of restoring what had been damaged. But tonight they could rest. Tonight they'd won. The news broke across Montana by morning. Federal raids, arrests, corruption exposed. Jack's phone rang constantly with reporters requesting interviews. He declined them all, letting Torres handle the media. His role was done. Now came the long process of justice. But the valley wasn't quiet. Tom Whitfield's hospitalization and arrest became the talk of Cedar Ridge. Opinion divided sharply between those who saw him as a traitor and those who understood the desperation that drove his choices. Jack found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending a man who'd betrayed him. "He made bad choices," Jack told Mary at the general store. "But he's still our neighbor. His wife didn't do anything wrong, and she's suffering. People need to remember that." Mary nodded approvingly. "That's gracious of you. More gracious than I'd be." "Gracious has nothing to do with it. It's just how communities work. We take care of our own, even when they've messed up." 3 days after the raids, Craig Vance surrendered to federal authorities in Denver. His lawyers immediately began negotiating, trying to shift blame to subordinates and claim he'd been misled about the legality of their operations. Torres called Jack with updates. "He's going to fight. This won't be quick or easy, but we have him dead to rights on multiple charges. His testimony against higher-ups might reduce his sentence, but he's going to prison." "What about the other executives? 2 are cooperating, 3 are fighting. Standard pattern. The ones who cooperate get lighter sentences and help us build cases against the real decision-makers." Sarah had stayed on the ranch, taking remote depositions and coordinating with Torres's legal team. She sat at Elena's old desk, surrounded by documents, looking more alive than Jack had seen her in years. "You're not going back to Denver, are you?" he asked one evening. She looked up from her laptop. "I gave notice yesterday. I'm opening a practice here, focusing on environmental law. Turns out there's a need for it, and Dad, I'm good at this. Better than I ever was at corporate litigation. Your mother would be thrilled." "I think she would. I found an office space in Cedar Ridge, right above the hardware store. Small, but it's a start." Sarah smiled. "I'm coming home." Really home, not just visiting. Jack felt emotion well up. His daughter, Elena's daughter, returning to carry on the work of protecting the land. It felt like completion of something Elena had started but never got to finish. Robert Hendricks, the corrupt Forest Service administrator, took a different approach. He confessed everything, providing detailed testimony about how Cascade had recruited him, how the corruption worked, what other officials might be compromised. His cooperation was devastating to Cascade's legal position. "Hendricks is giving us the entire playbook," Torres explained during a visit. "How they identify vulnerable officials, how they structure bribes to look legitimate, how they exploit regulatory loopholes. This is going to result in reforms across multiple agencies." Will he go to prison? Probably, but maybe minimum security with early parole. His cooperation is valuable enough to earn consideration, and honestly, he seems genuinely remorseful. Not everyone who gets corrupted is a bad person. Sometimes good people make terrible choices. Jack thought about Tom Whitfield, still in the hospital with injuries from his crash. Jack had visited once, a brief conversation that was painful for both of them. Tom apologized, Jack accepted, but they both knew their friendship was over. Some betrayals couldn't be undone. The mare continued healing. Doc Harrison declared her recovery remarkable, though the leg would never be completely sound. She'll need special care, but she can have a good life. The foal's doing wonderfully. Strong, healthy, curious about everything. Jack spent time with them every day. The foal had learned to trust humans, particularly Jack and Sarah. It would approach the stall door for scratches, nicker when it heard familiar voices. The mare remained more wary, but she tolerated human presence without fear. "What will happen to them?" Sarah asked one afternoon, as they watched the horses. "I've been thinking about that. The mare can't go back to the wild completely, but maybe she doesn't have to live in a stall either. There's a wild horse sanctuary outside of Helena, 100 acres of protected land. They take in horses that can't survive fully wild but don't adapt well to domestic life. You'd give them up? I'd give them the best life possible. That foal was born free. She deserves to grow up as close to free as we can manage." Sarah nodded slowly. Mom would approve of that. Community healing proved harder than Jack expected. The valley had divided over Cascade's promises, and those divisions didn't disappear with the arrests. Some people had genuinely believed the mining operation would bring prosperity. Others had taken money and now faced consequences. The fabric of community trust had been torn, and stitching it back together would take time. Dale Morrison called a town meeting 2 weeks after the raids. The hall was packed, tension thick in the air. Dale stood at the front, his normally jovial expression serious. "We need to talk about what happened and how we move forward. This valley has been through something that tested all of us. Some of us failed that test, some of us passed, but we're all still neighbors, still members of this community. So how do we heal?" The discussion went on for 3 hours. Some voices were angry, others conciliatory. Jack spoke briefly, focusing on the need to protect the land while acknowledging the economic pressures people faced. Mary reminded everyone of their shared history, the generations who'd worked together through drought and hardship. Slowly, a consensus emerged. The valley needed economic development, but not at the cost of destroying what made it worth living in. They needed to find ways to support families without selling out to corporations who saw only resources to extract. "We start by taking care of each other," Jack said. "That's what communities do. We look out for our neighbors, we preserve what's precious, and we make decisions based on what's right for the 7th generation from now, not just for next quarter's profits." It wasn't a perfect solution. Some people left the meeting still angry, still divided. But it was a start, and starts were what mattered. That night, standing on his porch under stars that had watched over this valley for millennia, Jack felt something approaching peace. The fight wasn't over. Legal proceedings would drag on for years. Community wounds would take time to heal. But the immediate crisis had passed. The land was protected, and his daughter was home. He thought of Elena, of her journals filled with careful observations and quiet wisdom. She'd understood what mattered, had spent her life documenting and protecting it. Now that work would continue through Sarah, through the legal protections they fought for, through community members who'd learned the cost of looking away. The federal indictments came down 6 weeks after the raids. 17 people charged with crimes ranging from environmental violations to corruption to racketeering. Craig Vance topped the list, along with 3 Cascade executives who directed the Montana operation. Robert Hendricks was charged but designated as a cooperating witness. Tom Whitfield faced fraud and conspiracy charges. Jack attended the initial court proceedings with Sarah and Rita. The courtroom was packed with media, environmental advocates, and industry representatives. This case had become national news, a test of whether environmental laws could actually stop well-funded corporations. Vance's lawyers argued that their client had relied on permits issued by government officials, that he'd operated in good faith within regulatory frameworks. Torres's team countered with evidence of deliberate deception, falsified reports, and systematic corruption. The judge listened impassively, then set trial dates for the following spring. "It's going to be a long process," Sarah explained as they left the courthouse. "Multiple defendants, complex evidence, appeals at every stage. But the government's case is strong. Convictions are likely. What surprised Jack was the response from other mining companies. 3 major corporations issued statements condemning Cascade's practices and calling for industry reform. Whether this was genuine concern or just public relations, it suggested the case was having broader impact. Torres met with Jack and Sarah a week later at the ranch. She brought news that was both satisfying and sobering. We've identified similar operations in 4 other states, all using the same playbook: shell corporations, corrupted officials, exploitation of regulatory gaps. The Montana case is giving us leverage to investigate those operations too. So this wasn't an isolated incident, Jack said. Not even close. Cascade was part of a larger pattern of companies trying to fast-track mineral extraction without proper environmental review. Your case is helping us stop that pattern. But other companies will try different approaches, Sarah observed. They will. That's why we need systematic reform, not just individual prosecutions. I'm testifying before Congress next month about regulatory gaps that enable this kind of abuse. The conversation turned to the land itself. Torres had coordinated with the Forest Service to conduct comprehensive environmental assessments of the areas Cascade had surveyed. The damage is significant but not irreversible. They did core drilling in sensitive areas, set trap lines that disrupted wildlife, contaminated several springs with drilling fluids, but with proper restoration, the ecosystem can recover. How long? Jack asked. 5 to 10 years for full recovery. Faster if we're aggressive with restoration efforts. Torres pulled out maps showing proposed remediation plans. The government's committed to funding this. Part of Cascade's settlement will go directly into environmental restoration. Jack studied the maps, recognizing every ridge and valley marked. This was Elena's wild country, the land she'd documented and loved. Knowing it would be protected and restored felt like fulfilling a promise. Tom Whitfield's case resolved differently than the others. His injuries from the crash required extensive rehabilitation, and his lawyers negotiated a plea deal. Tom would serve 18 months in minimum security, pay substantial fines, and permanently forfeit his property rights to areas used by Cascade. Jack visited him one last time before Tom entered prison. They met at the hospital, Tom in a wheelchair, looking diminished and old. "I don't expect forgiveness," Tom said. "I just wanted you to know I understand what I did. Not just the legal stuff, but the betrayal. You trusted me. The community trusted me. And I sold that trust for money I thought would solve my problems. Did it solve them? For about 6 months. Then the guilt started eating me alive. Every time I saw you in town, every time someone talked about strange things happening in the mountains, I knew I was responsible." Tom's hands trembled on the wheelchair arms. "My wife's filing for divorce. My kids won't speak to me. I've lost everything that actually mattered while trying to save things that didn't. I'm sorry it came to this." "Are you? Really?" Jack considered the question honestly. "Yes. I'm angry about what you did, but I'm sorry about what it cost you. Those are 2 different things." "You're a better man than me, Jack Mercer. You always were." They parted without shaking hands. 2 men who'd been neighbors for 30 years now, permanent strangers. Jack felt the weight of it, the sadness of how greed and fear could destroy relationships that should have been enduring. The Wild Horse Sanctuary accepted the mare and foal in early December. Jack, Sarah, and Carlos transported them personally, making the drive to Helena with a trailer carefully modified for the mare's injured leg. The sanctuary was beautiful, rolling grassland backed by mountains, protected and peaceful. Other wild horses grazed in the distance, herds that had been rescued from various circumstances. The mare would live here with her foal, as close to wild as her injury allowed. They released them into a large acclimation paddock. The foal immediately began exploring, while the mare stood still, head raised, testing the wind. After a moment she nickered to her baby, and they moved together toward the far fence where other horses waited. "She knows," Sarah said softly. "She knows this is right." Jack watched them go, feeling both loss and rightness. The foal would grow up here, running with other horses, learning the rhythms of herd life. The mare would recover in peace, her suffering just a memory gradually fading. "We should go," Carlos said gently. Jack took one last look, fixing the image in his mind, the mare and foal moving together toward the waiting herd, the mountains rising beyond, the big Montana sky overhead. This was what they'd fought for, this moment of two horses returning to something approaching freedom. On the drive home, Sarah asked the question Jack had been avoiding. Do you regret any of it? The fight, the danger, everything it cost? No. How could I? That mare would have died in agony. The land would have been poisoned. A company would have gotten away with systematic corruption. Someone had to stand up. But it didn't have to be you. Yes, it did. When you see something wrong and you have the power to fight it, you don't get to look away. That's not how decent people live. Sarah smiled. Mom used to say the same thing. She taught me well. They drove through familiar valleys as winter darkness fell. Jack's ranch waited ahead, his horses, his life restored to something approaching normal. But normal had changed. He'd changed, the valley had changed, and maybe, just maybe, those changes would lead to something better. Agent Torres called that evening with final news. Cascade Resource Management had filed for bankruptcy, unable to survive the legal fees and frozen assets. The company would be dissolved, its executives facing prison, its operations permanently shut down. You did it, Torres said. You took down a billion-dollar company. We did it, Jack corrected. All of us together. After hanging up, he stood on his porch one more time. The mountains rose dark against the stars, solid and eternal. Somewhere up there, the wild country Elena had loved was healing. Springs were running clear again. Wildlife was returning to disrupted areas. The land was proving its resilience. Jack thought about the mare and foal safe in their sanctuary. He thought about Sarah, home for good and fighting the good fight. He thought about Carlos and Rita and Doc Harrison and all the others who'd stood up when it mattered. One man hadn't defeated Cascade, a community had. Working together, refusing to be intimidated, they'd protected what mattered most. That was the real victory, and it would endure long after the legal proceedings concluded. Spring arrived with a gentleness that felt earned. Jack walked his property with Doc Harrison, surveying plans for expanded wild horse rehabilitation. The mare and foal story had inspired donors, and funding now existed to help other injured wild horses. We could accommodate 5 or 6 horses here, Doc explained. Temporary care while they recover, then transport to permanent sanctuaries. You'd be part of a network. Jack liked the idea. The barn had space, the land could support it, and it gave purpose to what they'd been through. Elena would have approved. Sarah's environmental law practice thrived. She'd already taken on 3 cases involving mining operations in other Montana valleys. Word had spread about the Cascade victory, and communities facing similar threats sought her expertise. I'm thinking about hiring an associate, she told Jack over breakfast. Rita's nephew just graduated law school. He's interested in environmental work. You're building something real. We're building it, Dad. This is as much your legacy as Mom's. The restoration work in the mountains progressed steadily. Federal crews repaired drilling damage, cleaned contaminated springs, and removed equipment Cascade had abandoned. Jack volunteered as a guide, his knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. On one such expedition, he stood at the clearing where he'd found the trapped mare. The trap was gone, the earth healing. Wildflowers grew where blood had stained the soil. Nature's resilience manifested in every green shoot pushing through disturbed earth. Carlos joined him, both men silent with memory. It's getting better, Carlos finally said. It is, slowly but definitely. The valley itself was healing too. Town meetings grew less contentious as people focused on moving forward rather than assigning blame. Economic development discussions now included environmental protection as non-negotiable. The community had learned an expensive lesson, but they'd learned it. Jack built Elena's memorial bench on a ridge overlooking the watershed they'd saved. Solid timber harvested from his own land, crafted with care over winter evenings. A brass plaque read, Elena Mercer. She knew what mattered and taught others to see it too. The dedication ceremony was simple. Sarah, Carlos and his family, Rita, Doc Harrison, Mary from the general store, and dozens of community members who'd known Elena. Agent Torres drove from Denver to attend, representing the federal agencies that had made protection permanent. My mother loved this view, Sarah said, standing beside the bench. She brought me here as a child and showed me wild horses running free. She taught me that some things have value beyond money, that protecting wildness isn't naive or impractical, but essential to keeping our humanity intact. Jack placed Elena's journals in a weatherproof case mounted beside the bench. Future generations could read her observations, understand what had been at stake, learn from her careful documentation of a landscape most people took for granted. The wild horse sanctuary sent photos regularly. The foal had grown tall and strong, running with the herd, fully integrated into wild horse society. The mare, though slower, lived peacefully, her injured leg manageable in the sanctuary's protected environment. Sarah announced her engagement to Marcus Webb, the deputy who'd helped investigate from the beginning. Jack approved. Marcus was solid, principled, committed to the valley's future. Elena would have liked him. "I'm staying in Montana," Sarah told Jack. "Building a life here, raising a family someday in this valley, carrying on what you and Mom started." Jack felt the weight of legacy settling comfortably. Not a burden but a gift passed from one generation to the next, each adding to the work of protection and preservation. Jack sits on Elena's bench at sunset, Sarah beside him planning her wedding. The protected valley stretches before them, healing and whole. He reflects on the journey from discovering a trapped mare to this moment of peace. The cost was high but necessary. The community emerged stronger, having confronted truth and chosen preservation over profit. The land will remain wild and free, protected for grandchildren he hopes to see. Elena's spirit lives in the wind through ancient pines, in the journals that taught a generation, in the daughter who carries on their shared purpose. The mare and foal are visible in distant sanctuary meadows, running together under big Montana sky, full circle from that desperate dawn when a frightened foal led him into the woods and changed everything. Jack feels gratitude for second chances, for communities that stand together, for the quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. Some fights must be fought. This one was worth it.